So we know that ideas travel culturally. Each one of us is now a global citizen and loves to experiment, scale, build for people. And that's when we know that Founders Across Borders is a true story of celebrating leaders, those who have been building across borders for a huge cultural audience and ensuring that they're able to impact and provide the right value. And to prove that right and inspire each one of us today, we have been joined by Palveshey Tariq. She's been the founder of Alternative Coaching Methods, wherein helping leaders redefine health, wealth through plant medicine, consciousness work. I would say, as Palveshey says, a very unconventional path, an asymmetric path, led Palveshey build and sold two companies, led AI research at MIT, taught at Harvard, World Bank, launching her own blockchain think tank. Oh my God, I mean, that's so much. I would love that Palshi talks more about all of this. Today, working with leaders worldwide, transmuting pain into freedom, the subconscious narratives that we struggle with, uncovering them, sharpening edges, and whatnot. Also, an interesting book that I think we would be going deep down and talk about it is about how to kill yourself, finding peace and purpose through pain. So, would love to discuss about the book as well. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such a pleasure doing this with you today, Palshi.
Thank you so much for having me.
I would love to know that as you mentioned about having an unconventional and asymmetric career. So, what probed you into this direction of doing different things and having a portfolio career?
Um, I suppose I'll start from the beginning. I left home when I was very young, and that led to a lot of hardship and struggle, as any 17-year-old might experience getting going out into the world on their own. And I worked very, very hard because I was incredibly afraid of being homeless, and I kind of wanted to cover all my bases. So I studied many different topics. I studied math, political science, and linguistics in my undergraduate career in hopes of working for the CIA or the NSA.
Wow.
But by the time I got to the end of my bachelor's, I no longer wanted to do that. I had an experience in DC where I felt like that cutthroat environment was just not for me. And so I decided to pursue finance and software engineering for my master's. And in doing so, afterwards, I created a crypto hedge fund and a sister blockchain think tank. And I ultimately ended up selling that. I still didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life, so I went and pursued more further studies in quantum physics. And I think by the end of it all, now I had food in my belly, a roof over my head, all the titles and accolades. But I found myself being deeply depressed and unfulfilled in life. And I couldn't figure out why, because everyone told me that this was success. These were the measures of success. I now had my own company, which I successfully built and sold. I received an Ivy League education, and everyone was like, that is the marker of success. And now had
Right.
some money, and at the end of it, I just felt so empty inside. And I went to go see a therapist, and they prescribed me antidepressants and ADHD medication, which was Adderall. And this turned into a severe addiction. Um, and no one really told me that that was possible. I thought, oh, doctors are helping me, but no one disclosed to me that these were addictive substances. And so I started to drink alcohol and smoke cigarettes and really just started to become a shell of a person. And I was only 28 at the time when I attempted to take my own life. And it was around this time that a little voice said inside, started speaking up and was like, okay, how about we wait 2 years? And if you really don't find happiness by the time you're 30, then you can call it quits and put a bullet in your head. And so I waited and I quit my job. I sold my house. I moved to a new city. And this was the first point at which I quit all the drugs as well. And I went through severe withdrawals. and I reached for psilocybin mushrooms as an escape, and that's just not what happened. I spent about 5 hours crying on the couch and really owning the role I played in my own suffering. And that was the first point at which I realized I needed to sit alone with my thoughts more often, even without the medicine, and become the medicine myself. So this sparked a 2 year journey of meditating 4 to 8 hours every day, and it completely changed me. I questioned every single belief system that I had, and at the root of it was, I suppose, the real me, the part of me that I didn't know was even there. And from there, I began creating my own coaching programs, and that's what's led to today.
Wow. I mean, thank you for sharing the vulnerability and the entire journey with us over here. I can empathize what is it to be the high achiever and then get into a complete different life of loop which feels like a rabbit hole. I'm so glad that it feels like I'm speaking to a real-time fighter today who has fought her own demons and this line that you said, that figuring out that you are your own medicine in the end, which is I mean I'm super touched and I'm stoked. I'm so grateful that you shared this. Thank you for this.
Yes, I mean, I think we all have struggles, and it's important that we share a journey along the way because there's really no healing without community or support.
And to understand the entire space of getting into blockchain, being so much into tech, and how did you make a shift on the soft skill side, like talking about the unconventional life freedom, making a switch? Was it because of your own life journey that you felt that people need a different perspective, or you realize that all the other industries out there right now just may not feed the purpose of your soul?
Um, I think I experienced so many different industries and worked in everything from finance to tech to science. And when that didn't bring me fulfillment, my only option was to go within. And when I sat down for the first time, it was actually my husband who noticed. He said to me, I noticed that when you sit and breathe, you take a deep inhale in, but then you don't exhale. And a lot of us do this, especially when we're focusing, which is so counterintuitive to focus itself because the brain needs oxygen for focus. And I noticed that, yeah, when I would inhale, I would let my breath out in little segments. And so I sat down in hopes of really connecting with my breath. So I was like, okay, inhale, now exhale. Inhale, now exhale. And if anyone has ever sat alone for a while, what tends to happen is that the mind will start to roam. Our body and mind are incredibly complex where we're capable of doing more than one thing at the same time while the mind roams around thinking about something completely different. And so
Correct.
here I am breathing, and I notice in between all of my task oriented thoughts where it was like, oh, I need to do the dishes. Oh, I need to take care of the dog. Oh, and remember that one traumatic experience that we had? Oh, I need to dust. I need to finish homework. Oh, and remember that one traumatic experience that we had? And it started occurring to me. It was this old memory that I didn't even realize I remembered. And I started talking to myself. I started telling myself, it's okay, you're safe now. This is why we took the path that we did, and everything's fine now. And little by little, I started doing this with every memory. Um, and then came belief systems and assumptions and limiting beliefs. And I started talking myself and asking myself, wait, how do you know that's true? How do you know what you think is true? And if it's not true, what's truer? And that started to lead me to really question everything I had been told or learned in this world, realizing that Really, a lot of what I thought I liked and didn't like was just conditioning by society.
So, do you believe that all the realizations that one has in their life are all internal and very few of it is actually external?
When you say realizations, what do you mean by that?
As you mentioned that you need had to sit with yourself to exactly figure out about what you want and how do you want things to be out there. So all that entire realization, was it all internal or how was the entire process for you?
Oh, yes. Almost all of my realizations were internal. I had tried therapy in the past and it didn't work. It always felt like I was speaking to someone who was trained through a textbook and didn't quite understand my life experience or my conscious experience. And so almost all of my realization or transformation took place internally. Um, and that required sitting with myself in silence for long periods of time.
And amidst, I personally know like digital detox is so difficult for all of us. I mean, each one of us right now lives in such a huge simulation that we are all simulated at every single point in time. Like even today, like if you have your phone out there, if you see that there's no conversation going on, the first thing we are gonna do is just hey, just look out there, find a phone, pick the phone, maybe just scroll for like 30 seconds and put the phone aside, which is how each one of us has been living life for so long. So, do you think that this simulation that we have exposed ourselves to is doing us more harm than more benefit?
I think that's a great question because it's so complex to answer, especially since technology has such great potential to help us as humanity, and it has in many ways. It has made life incredibly convenient. You can order really anything on your phone at this point, and you go on Amazon, buy something, and it arrives at your door within 2 days or less. Sometimes it even arrives within hours. You can go on your phone, order food. At this point, you can even order sex or get a relationship just through an app and swiping. It's very simple and very convenient. And at the same time, what that convenience has done, it has overloaded our dopamine systems. And not just overloading our dopamine systems, but it has led to a level of comparison that was not possible before. Whereas we would look at perhaps just the individuals in our community to guide us or look up to, but now we have really everyone in the whole world to compare ourselves to. And most people are just posting their highlight reels. So several of us start comparing our chapter 1 to other people's chapter 10 and then start feeling like shit about ourselves. But really, I would say that flowers are pretty, but so are sunsets, and they look nothing alike.
I love the metaphor, like comparing flowers to sunsets, which is important because we do miss out on so many different things out there in our life, the essence of it, the beauty of it, and then we are like, hey, we've no idea how things have been shaping out there. And sometimes I wonder, like since you had such an asymmetric career, and I'd say one of the, like, in terms, societal terms, because internally each one of us has a very different definition of success. But in terms of societal norms, it has been a very successful graph working in different industries associated with different, like MIT, Harvard, the Ivies. When do you feel like, according to you, when did you actually feel the most accomplished? Now you can answer it in a way like self accomplished, which would be a very different answer. Or when was a time in your life when you felt that, this is what accomplishment means to me?
I would say that when I hear you ask about accomplishment, the first thing that comes up for me is a definition of success. And I would say that I would feel in my life so far, I feel the most successful now. And that's because I'm not measuring myself against other people or even measures of society, which are usually titles and money. But that success now means inner peace to me, which I think is the goal in many ways. That I went out looking for happiness only to realize that happiness is a state of mind. It comes and goes, and that I'm happy in this conversation, for example, and it's temporary. But peace and joy are states of being, they're ever present. And I think that's really what true success is.
And it's so different from all the money and entrepreneurship that we usually talk about. Like, for example, if you ask someone who is an entrepreneur, for them success would be, hey, if my company has a valuation of $50 million, $100 million, maybe $100 million in revenue, and $1 billion valuation, maybe that's success to them. For someone else it could be something that's so different. Each one of us has so different definitions of success, and this aspect that you've talked about, that comes into the peace and like the happiness part of it, and which is internal, I mean, and the long term, it's so spiritual. How do you equate spirituality to the money side of it? I mean, if you ask me right now, I would definitely say that, hey, I think this is a certain revenue number in my mind, which I feel, or maybe this kind of PR, which I feel, this is success for me right now. Could be something else for you. So, how do I equate this spiritual quotient, which brings that peace and happiness into my life? And because, for example, I touched that revenue point, or anyone who touches a revenue point is now on to the next number, like, hey, what's the next that I can do now? So I think that quest for wanting more would never end. Shouldn't, but yeah, I mean, it would never end then.
I see. I think a lot of us believe that what we do is who we are, which is not the case. That there are three states: thinking, being, and doing. Thinking and doing are extensions of being. That who we are matters most first, because then everything we do is an extension of that. Now, for a lot of people, what I've learned in my work, especially, is that the number in the bank account is usually associated with their own self worth, which is part of why they're always chasing more. But when your self worth is inherently valuable, which is the case for all of us, we're all worthy of just being here because we're here. The fact that we are spiritual beings having a human experience in this incredible world that we can't even quite define, because when we start looking into under a microscope and into atoms, really most of it is just space. So how is it even all magically working? The fact that we are even here, and this and floating around on this giant piece of rock, hurtling through space, is in itself such an incredible experience that that is worthy in itself. Everything else is just an extension of that. So even money, that's just an extension of your own energetic flow. That money is just you exchanging one energy for another energy. That's really what it is. And even in relationships, we're just transacting energies between ourselves. Now, when it comes to worth, I think that's also subjective. There's a great story about a girl with a little gray stone. um, do you mind if I share it?
Please, I would love to listen to this.
So there's a girl who finds a gray stone in her backyard, and she brings it to her father and she says, "Look what I found." And he looks at it and he says, "Okay, I want you to go across the street to the marketplace and show this to the man there. And when the merchant asks you how much it is, just hold up two fingers and don't say anything." And so she does as her father says. And when she goes there and the merchant looks at it, he's like, "How much is this?" She holds up two fingers and he says, $2. I'll take it. Then she takes the stone back to her father and tells him what happened. Then her father says, "All right, go around the corner to the antique store and do the same thing." And so she goes to the antique store, and the man looks at it and is like, "Wow, this is an old stone. How much is it?" She holds up two fingers and he says, $200. I'll take it. Then she takes the stone back to her father and he tells him what happened. And he says, "All right, now go across town to the jeweler and do the same thing." And so she goes to the jeweler And the jeweler looks at it and carefully inspects it and says, "Wow, this is a rare gemstone. How much is it?" And she holds up two fingers and he says, $2,000. I'll take it. Then she takes the stone back to her father and tells him what happened. And her father says, "This is just like life. If you don't set your value, others will set it for you."
Absolutely. I mean, to hear this, it's so enriching, is because so many of us undervalue ourselves, whether we are founders into coaching, into mentorship, and then we feel that, hey, this is not working. Hey, we are underpaid, undervalued. People do not respect us, and that's when, the entire conversation that we've had as of now, the internal reflection, is because you yourself have never valued you that much. Why would someone else value you when you yourself has not been valuing yourself as a person in terms of the values that you hold? I mean, something that you have might be a piece of gem to the other person. Maybe your beauty, your insights, the information that you carry could be anything that you feel is of no use, and it's gold to the other person or any other person's eyes. Maybe you were the hero. But you never knew is because you never valued yourself. So I totally agree with this aspect, and would love to understand about the entire company that you built and about the alternative coaching methods, since I know that coaching industry has so many coaches out there, wellness. I mean, you know this better than I do. So what made you get into the same industry knowing that this has so much of competition, so many companies out there with different propositions? What made you set yourself apart and actually establish this place as a haven for all the people who came for help or came to uncover themselves through the alternative coaching methods?
I think, like many people, I also valued myself based off of how much money I was making. And really, others started valuing me for the same reason. And that didn't feel good because then I was being valued for my pocketbook. And at a certain point, I asked myself, what do I value in life? And I did an activity, which I do with a lot of my clients, looking at the three best and three worst decisions you've ever made and why. In that why are your hidden values. And then once I extracted those values, which for me were freedom, peace, and growth, that I started auditing my life in every way that I spent money, the way I ate food, the way I spoke to individuals, the way I cultivated relationships and trust, even down to the way I treated the earth. That was this in alignment with freedom, growth, or peace. And if it wasn't, I even did a companion audit of all my friends and started realizing, oh, a lot of the people I'm friends with, I don't actually have anything in common with, and I don't actually like them. And it doesn't seem like they like me either. We're just friends because we worked together or we drink together. And so I started to do a full overhaul of my life where I changed my entire social circle and I changed the way I started approaching relationships. And in doing so, these became the core values of the company as well. That it was meant to help people grow, find peace, and find true freedom. And true freedom requires that we look at the hard truth even within ourselves and take some ownership of the role we play in our own suffering. That there's a fine line between owning your shit and being full of it. And it's important that we look at that within ourselves. And so originally I shared my story with a friend and he was like, I feel like I need this. Will you trip sit me? And so I did. And so much came up for him that we talked about the process for weeks and how to integrate back into his life. It was so helpful that he started talking about it in therapy. Turns out his therapist had been taking antidepressants for about 2 decades. And so the therapist came to see me and I helped him get off of the drugs, and we did a ceremony, and it was so helpful for him. He started referring all of his clients. And next thing I know, I'm doing ceremonies and journeys with individuals. But I found that a lot of people were coming in thinking, I'm going to do magic mushrooms and all my problems are magically going to be solved. And that's just not what happens. They shed light on all the dark areas that you've been avoiding and then assign you the homework, but you still have to go home and do the work. And so I expanded out into 12-week programs because I think it's important that we take responsibility for how we engage with these medicines as tools so that they can help us grow towards freedom and peace. And so now we do 6 weeks of prep, then a ceremony, then 6 more weeks of integration. And then we also have group experiences where we do 3 weeks of prep, 5 day retreats in Jamaica, and then 3 more weeks of integration where you also get an element of community.
Wow. So to understand it better, I mean, and from your experience, since you have experimented with Adderall, magic mushrooms, do you think all of this actually helps human mind? I mean, I would put them in the category of psychedelics, if I'm right. Am I right?
Yes. So
Ah,
magic mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms are considered psychedelics. Um, I don't know if Adderall helps the human mind. In my perspective, that's just extended release meth. It's almost the same compound, and it's highly addictive. And it doesn't really get to the root cause of a lack of focus. It may allow you to focus in the short term, but over time, it actually starts to deplete your dopamine and serotonin. Magic mushrooms or psilocybin mushrooms, research has shown that it actually increases neuroplasticity, increases memory, and a recent study has also shown that it increases longevity by almost 40%. So they did a study on rats where the control group wasn't given any, and then the other group was given some, and the rats that were given psilocybin lived almost in human years almost up to 90, whereas the ones who didn't lived up to around 50 years of age. So psilocybin has shown a lot of promise, especially in recent research, and it gets to the root cause. So I have a lot of individuals who have addictions to alcohol, nicotine, or incredibly traumatic life experiences that they can't overcome, have been taking antidepressants for years. And then they come and do one ceremony, 1 to 2 ceremonies, and they never touch substances again.
wow. That's like an information and a half for me. I'm wanting to try them now. Like I've never tried them, but now I'd love to experience what is it to be in that state and to get into the deeper instance of it. Like since we are talking about a global landscape and working with people who come from different cultures, I'm not sure if, all like, or maybe you need to tell me the practices that you preach or the things that you talk about. How do you deal with all of this when you're working with a culturally diverse audience? Is because, for example, maybe I come from a culture wherein X thing is not okay, and or maybe X kind of communication or straightforwardness is something that I'm not okay with. So, how do you navigate this complexity of working with such a global audience?
I think we're from the same culture. So I definitely understand that Middle Eastern Indian culture can be quite different when it comes to perhaps communication or accepting things that are outside of the norm or socially accepted. Um, Now, with that said, I think it is also up to the individual that if the individual is truly ready for change, then let's do the work. That the spaces, the particular space that I like to provide my clients is this is a space where we can talk about anything and everything that might be taboo and go into all of the dark areas of our psyche, of our soul, because there's no such thing as all light. Like everyone has a shadow side as well, and it's important we explore that non-judgmentally in order to use that to help us move forward and to grow. That if we continue to deny those dark parts of ourselves, we're never truly free, and we never truly cultivate peace. Now, one thing I have noticed across the board is that every human values growth and connection. We're kind of like mycelium and plants in that way, that we deeply value growth and connection. And it's when we stop growing or lack connection that we actually start feeling depressed.
So, I mean, based on the information, as you've mentioned, growth and connection. And I think if we tap onto these, like, I would say these areas like a wants, what someone wants. So, do you think it's easier for us to connect? I mean, since you like work with people in States, Canada, so much, so often. So, what is the striking difference that you observe when there is a mindset clash? I mean, someone who's coming from the Asian side of it or the Middle Eastern side of it, and then someone who's from the West world. So, what are the starking mindset differences that you see working with people?
I think, I mean, if we're talking about across cultures, now I've worked with individuals from many, many different cultures. But I think let's use South Asian culture as an example. One of the
Right.
things that comes up in Asian cultures compared to Western cultures is obligation to family, and that's a big one that comes up in Eastern cultures. And sometimes when an individual begins to change, the family doesn't want them to change. And so there's this balance of trying to understand, well, I have this obligation to my family and I love them and I respect them, and they are preventing me from growing. So what's the fine line? How what's the boundary? And that ultimately comes down to the individual and their goals. That if the person does want to maintain that relationship with the family, then it's important that we start working on compassion, understanding, and patience, and really helping them understand where their family might be coming from. Whereas there are some individuals who decide, you know what, I want to go further down this path and my family truly does not understand, and they set harder boundaries. Again, it's completely up to the individual. In the Western world, I find that more individuals are focused on career orientation and more attached to perhaps financial wealth. Um, and so the work is a little different. So, of course, mindsets are different across the board. And these are, I am overgeneralizing. This is not the case for everyone, but these are some of the trends that I see across borders, for example.
And to like understand it, of course, I mean, I agree with you as well. This is what I mean. So it would like vary based on people, cultures, and so many different things out there. However, how do you navigate when you consult people? I mean, the motivation to change themselves or like to find the true freedom, true peace. If you had to like guide someone with a three-step process as to how can they actually find their true self, true freedom, which unlocks the pathway to ultimate success that they see. Now, that success can be linked to wealth, or maybe them winning that sports marathon or that Ironman championship that they dreamed of. So, how do you unlock this freedom to unlock that ultimate achievement or ultimate process of being, like being that this is what I want to do, this is the entire goal attainment process for me?
Okay, so when someone comes in and is wants to work with me. Basically, what the analogy that I use is you're hiring me as like an interior designer of your mind. So your mind is your home. You've hired me as your interior designer. So step one is taking inventory of what's in there. So we need to cultivate awareness. We need to look at what furniture, what artwork, what really all the furnishings you have in there. So this includes your mindset, your what your beliefs are, what your thoughts are, what emotions are being activated, when do they get triggered, what traumatic experiences have you had, what are your relationships like, and what were your relationships like with your parents in childhood and now. So we're taking inventory of everything that's there, and we're cultivating that awareness. Step two is the psilocybin journey. This is a part where we decide, okay, what do we want to get rid of now? This is everything that's in here, but what's not serving me anymore? What's taking up too much space? So, one way I like to describe the psilocybin journey is imagine a hill with snow, and you take sleds down from that hill. Those sleds create grooves. Over time, certain grooves become deeper than others. So, no matter where you take the sled down from, those deepest grooves pull you in. Those are your habit formations. Those are the limiting beliefs and the thoughts that you access the most. What psilocybin does is it lays down a whole new layer of snow and allows your consciousness a chance to recreate those grooves on purpose with purpose. So the 21 days after the psilocybin journey, you have the most neuroplasticity, and they're the most crucial weeks for you to change some of your habits and rewire some of your beliefs. So after the psilocybin journey, now we have step three, where we've taken inventory of what's in your mind, we've gotten rid of what no longer serves us, and now we bring in the new stuff. So you can't bring in new furniture if you still have old stuff in, it's going to get cluttered. So now you bring in the new beliefs that you want, the new emotions that you'd like, and how to rewire them. There's a very specific process of looking at what emotions are attached to what thoughts and why they're being driven by those emotions and how to change that. So after each session, we always leave off with an action item. This is what it makes us different from therapy. So we're constantly moving forward and growing until the end of those 12 weeks. So I start off with the mindset assessment and end with the mindset assessment so you can gauge results from beginning to end.
So you give them like an entire trajectory of being like, hey, you can navigate from this, navigate from that, do this, do that, and through that actually make the entire space for yourself. I mean, it's like X to Y, but a journey wherein every time you need to navigate and realize how you're able to make that change for yourself.
Yes, and you're not doing it alone. We meet every week. So we have weekly meetings to constantly work on what we left off from last time and now how to take that forward.
Wow. And since you've had like a journey with IVs, like you've been a researcher at MIT, you've been at Harvard, so I think a lot of time you've spent at Boston. And I could relate because I know how the Boston culture is. Like living in Boston just fills you up with like, oh, there's every single person you meet is somewhere researching, is a scientist on their own. And coming from that region, how much, firstly, how was the experience, like how did you get there? What was something that actually made you pave a way to Ivy League? And second, how was that transition from that space into this space?
Well, what led me there was the fact that everyone said that that's the goal. Like, that's the highest achievement that you can possibly have to get to an Ivy League. So, my goal was always Harvard. And I very much enjoyed my time there. It was some of the best professors that I've ever encountered throughout my academic career. But it wasn't for me. And the transition out of that, to be quite honest, it was freeing in many ways. It allowed me to explore life on my own without someone else telling me what I needed to do. And ultimately, what I've done now has actually taken me back to Harvard and some of the other universities that I've once studied at to teach what I've learned since then.
I really appreciate the skill of, like giving back to the community as well. Like you've built so many things out there and you want to give back to the community. Which brings us to an interesting segment that we do. It's called Seven Questions to Fame. And once you're ready, I'd love to shoot seven questions around your way.
Okay, no pressure.
Cool. So, according to you, what has been that one hard skill that you feel right now is the most important to build something of your own? Or if you're building, expand.
I think a lot of people might consider this a soft skill, but I think it's quite honestly very hard. But I would say sitting with yourself in silence. That we all have inner guidance that I think is worth honoring before we take the recommendation of others, because no one knows what's good for you better than you.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think that's most difficult as well. I still remember my therapist telling me that the idea of rest in your life is not there. And I was like, makes sense. So, I mean, that I could not say anything else to her. She was right, anyways. So I feel you. The next thing would be, what has been, do you believe, firstly, that the tags that are there in the life, they are the largest or the biggest stepping stone to success? And you can give context as well to it.
The tags.
Tags like, of course, Harvard, or like big tags like maybe consulting companies, Ivy Leagues, the tags or the credibility that the tags add to your profile.
I
Are
see.
they huge stepping stones in your career, or there's life beyond that as well?
I think that there is life beyond that, that they can be stepping stones depending on what your intention is in your life and in your career. But I think the hardships in your life can be even bigger stepping stones, that a person who has been torn down and destroyed 1,000 times knows 1,000 ways to rebuild themselves. And so pain is not necessarily something to avoid, but something to learn from. That pain is a teacher in many ways.
If you had to navigate one method that has always proven to get yourself out of the self sabotaging state, what would that one method be?
Asking myself, what am I really afraid of? Just that simple question of what am I really afraid of will start revealing the answers of that fear. And then I can start questioning the fear of, well, is this true? Is this really true? How do I know it's true? And if it's not true, what's truer? So I'll give you an example where I was constantly self sabotaging myself when I had the crypto hedge fund, and I had an incredibly high employee turnover rate because nobody wanted to work with me. People hated working with me. And it was mostly because I hated me and I used to treat others like shit. But really, I started asking myself, why does this keep happening to me? And when I really started asking myself that, I was like, well, what I'm really afraid of is that nobody will want to be around me. So I try to grasp and hold on to them. And that makes them want to be around me even less. And that, is it true that they're terrible employees? And the answer to that was no. It's not true that they're terrible employees. What's truer is that I'm a terrible manager. And that was a hard pill to swallow, but it led me to a realization that allowed me to change.
Now, that makes a lot of sense to understand this. The next question would be, if I had to connect with a global audience, according to you, what is the best way to do that?
A global audience. Now, I think we live in a time where it's so easy to connect with a global audience between all of the social media platforms and all of the technology that we have. But in order to truly stand out amongst all the noise, I think the way to that is authentically being yourself, to truly honor who you are, because most of us are just pretending to be people that we think we're supposed to be.
I think that's too deep to understand and set yourself to get the depth of it. If you had to change one thing about your life, what would you change?
I don't know if I would change anything. Everything that I've encountered or experienced has led me to who I am today, and I love who I am today.
And what has been the biggest advice that shifted your mind state? Like from not being addicted to rebuilding my life once again.
Advice. I think this was my own inner guidance that something that really shifted for me was, and I shared this with you, don't smooth your edges to fit in, sharpen them to become dangerous. That it's not about, you're not here to fit in. That's not what your life is about. You're here to make a difference and impact.
And the last question would be, if you could change one thing in the way the world is currently, what would you like to change?
I would create a law that everyone in the world would have to follow, and that would be to sit in silence for 15 minutes a day.
Thank you for sharing this, but this definitely we end the round. But I'd love to deep dive into. You talked about frequency. You talked about sitting with yourself, and we also talked about how the West operates in terms of like wealth being one of the wealth and the credibility tags being the maximum ways of how we measure success. So, how can one align the frequency of themselves in a way that whatever they put their mind to, they are able to achieve that? I mean, if I say that, even though for 90% of people, you're a fool trying to achieve that, but how would you make that shift? And do you think frequencies play an important role? Maybe, maybe not as well, but since you've talked about it, how would you do that?
Oh, yes, I do think frequency play an important role. I think Nikola Tesla said that if you want to understand the universe, you need to think in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. Because, yeah, it's all energy that's vibrating at a certain frequency. And there's a very real example of this. So think about when you've perhaps walked into a room after someone has just had an argument. You can feel the tension. That's, you're feeling their vibes. That's just shorthand for vibration. That's a frequency that they're emitting that you can feel. It's a very real experience. So I do think frequency plays a huge role in how we interact with each other in the world. And I can't stress this enough. I think that the first step is to sit with yourself in silence, because you'll start noticing everything that's going on in the mind and in the body. And once you start to notice it, once you begin to observe it, and science proves this. So the double slit experiment in the early 1900s showed us that the observer effect, that observing light changes its behavior from a particle to a wave, or vice versa. And that's not true for just our external world. That's true for our internal world as well, that the first step towards changing behavior is observing behavior. So if you sit with yourself in silence, what you're essentially doing is observing your own behavior.
Wow. And we have an interesting segment that's called 90 Seconds to Teach Me Something. So, since we've had so much of insightful conversations, right now I give you 90 seconds. What would you like to teach me?
I would like to teach you, yes, do not smooth your edges to fit in. Sharpen them to become dangerous. That people might tell you all along the way that you're unfocused, you don't know what you're doing, you'll never make it as a coach. God, I can't even tell you how many times I heard that one. And I would say, instead of falling into pity and asking yourself, why me, turn that why me into watch me and go do the thing that you're actually here to do.
Wow. I'm glad and grateful to actually hear this and learn this from you. And to my questioning, there are so much like there are times, when someone does not want to do something, when you just have no clarity, when you feel that you don't have a purpose driving you, you don't feel obsessed with something, and those valley of despairs. How do you navigate through that?
Those moments of despair, how do I navigate through that?
Yeah.
Well, I think one is that there's this quote, and I forget who says it, that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. So, just as you begin to observe your internal world, when you have moments of despair and you experience pain, you can observe that as well and welcome that as an old friend that's just visiting, because just like the clouds passing by on a sky, your emotions are also just passing by. Every experience in life is just passing by, and you're the observer of that life. You're also the creator of that life. So life's not happening to you, and sometimes it's not even happening for you. It's happening from you. And so when you're in moments of despair, it's you don't always need to fix it right away. Sometimes it's just a matter of allowing it to move through you.
Thank you for sharing this, Palveshey. It is very empowering. And I really hope that all the things that we have talked about, I'm personally able to implement them in my own life, and people who listen to this are able to like get these key takeaways and navigate through subtle or complex challenges that they face, even on a day-to-day basis, or even like something that shifts something transcendental within them.
Yes, I
And
think that's the point of life. We're meant to transform.
And I absolutely know, would love to carry the conversation. And sometimes, there's a pit stop to it. Before we part ways, what is one thing that you'd like to say?
I'd like to say, don't be afraid. Have faith in your abilities.
That's amazing. And for anyone who wants to like be a part of alternative coaching, I think we could share the details with them. Maybe someone wants really inspired by the conversation and wants to get in touch with you. So I really hope that being a part of the ecosystem, they're benefited in a deeper way.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Palshi. It was truly an enriching experience to hear all of this from you.